Hey folks, welcome to the second tutorial at phpscripting.com. Today we'll be dealing with MySQL as well as variables. Creating your own variables and playing with them is fun. However, in a real-life context, you're going to probably want to store the data in a database so that you can call it later on and use it how you wish. We'll be creating a MySQL database table, then a connection file. We'll create the form, and then of course the processing file that puts the data into the database and gives us the option of seeing the data that we have put into the database. We'll be working with guitars. I'm an avid guitar player, so I thought that this would be appropriate. I hope you learned something from this and enjoy. Our first step is to open phpMyAdmin. We're going to create a table called guitars with 4 columns. Press go. In our first field, we're going to have ID. We're going to leave it at integer 11. It's going to be your primary index, and you're going to auto increment. Next item is brand of various characters, 100. Type, various characters, 100. And price, various characters, 20. Now, a lot of people would work with integers with prices, but I find it can be a real headache. If you use various characters, you can put whatever you want in that field. You can still do mathematics with it and work with it like you would an integer. Step number 2 involves creating the HTML form that we will use to pass data to the database. I'm assuming that most of you know basic HTML. If not, it would be a good time to learn. You can always copy my example and learn from that. We want an input type of text, name of brand. Next one would be type and type. These are the 3 main elements that we put into our database table, which is brand, type, and price. Name is how your processing form knows what to pass over. So that is your actual variable within the form, within the HTML form. When we get to the PHP processing form, then you'll understand how this works. Moving on, our next step would be to create a file that connects us to the database. We're creating a separate file for this called dbcon.php so that you can call it up anywhere in your script. You could write this on every page. However, it's really unnecessary. You'll see how we'll link to that file in a moment. We've got con, MySQLi connect, localhost is the first element, your username. In this case, there's no password. And then the actual database, not the table. Now we can connect to the database. Our main processing file will be called guitars.php, or you can call it whatever you want. That's what I choose to call it. First things first, we want to require the dbcon PHP file so that we can guarantee a connection to our database. You can find this at W3 Schools, that exact code, but I'm typing it out for you so perhaps you can learn it by repetition. It's basically just telling you that if there is no connection to the table, to the database, you'll get an error. So make sure that when you create the dbcon file, you're doing it correctly and putting in the correct details. Now we can finally start working on processing the data that we're sending from the HTML form. If is set, post, add guitar. Now that was the name on your submit button. Basically saying if the form isn't submitted, don't process. And is not empty. Post. Brand. If I can spell it right. And then, of course, you want to do that with all three of our main variables. Copy and paste is handy. So now we'll go to type, and then we want price. Now we can define those variables. This is how you define a variable that's been passed through a form. Brand would be post, brand. Now, within the quotations, that's the name that is coming from your form. So if you choose to call it something different, then whatever goes between the quotations would be what the name is on the HTML form. Remember that. Now, of course, we do this with all three of our variables. That's the first step toward inserting the data into the database. Now, before we insert anything into the database, we have to make sure it's clean. We're basically pulling out any unsafe characters that somebody may put into the form in the event they get a hold of it. It's quite similar to other statements, as you can see. We're just using MySQL real escape string. Do this again for all three variables. Many people feel that MySQL real escape string is old school and that PDO works better. I'm just learning PDO. This will work, however. This will still ensure that SQL injection will not be carried out into your database for the most part. The chances of it happening are pretty slim to begin with. Now we can begin to insert the data into the database. I call it IGETS, meaning insert guitars. Insert into guitars, brand, type, price. Then we define the values, and these are the variables. It's pretty straightforward. Queries are one of the easiest things to do, I find. Now, if we actually look at IGETS, if you actually look at that, IGETS itself is a variable. We're actually creating a variable with this query. So it goes to show you how important variables are with PHP. They basically are the meat and potatoes of the language. Once you understand that concept, things become a lot more clear. And then, of course, we want to insert the ID. It will automatically insert the auto increment ID that we created in the table. And that's all it takes to put the data into the database. Now, once we've inserted the data into the database, we want to be able to see what we inserted. If you choose, but that is usually the way people go. So now we want to select what we inserted into the database. This is how fast it will work. So you will see what you inserted. Now you could do this through a session, and a lot of people do. However, we're storing it in the database for future use, especially when it comes to something like this. If you're storing the types, brands, types, and prices of guitars, and you want to display them later on your website, keeping them in the database is a hell of a lot more reliable than using session cookies and whatnot. So I didn't bother to show you the HTML and how I print it out and everything. You can figure that out on your own, or copy me by the video. Now, as you can see, we get a mistake if we click the form and we don't insert anything. That's your else statement. And then, of course, we enter Fender Stratocaster, at $1,000. Now notice there is no money sign. We do that when we parse the HTML later on. A money sign will definitely conflict with PHP. So it's better just to put in the integer itself, or in this case, various character variable, and spit it out accordingly using HTML. Now we can also change how we view the items. I've got order by brand descending. Now I'll change it to type. After entering another guitar, type. There you go. So you can change the order in which they're shown. Now that's kind of backwards. Usually you want to go alphabetically. So I went back and changed it to ascending, which will give us an alphabetical listing of the guitar types. Les Paul, Stratocaster, Telecaster, alphabetical. Of course, you can also do this by price. Most of the time when you go to a store to buy something, then you can actually see several options for browsing whatever data may be on that site, and you can use different queries. You can use different queries to show that information to the consumer. This is where things become really handy when it comes to PHP. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. For the folks that watch it, I'll be doing a blog post as well, and I'll cover most of what I covered here in some text. For those who might not want to watch the video or might have problems watching the video, sometimes YouTube is a pain in the ass. And stay tuned for more tutorials. I hope I was clear enough and that you can actually learn something from this. Thanks for visiting phpscripting.com. Much more to come.